I want to slow this down for a second because when we talk about the moment your retirement funds start working without you, it's easy to turn it into some dramatic turning point, a specific dollar amount, a magic age, a clean cinematic scene where you look at your account and whisper, "That's it, I'm free." But in real life, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like a Tuesday night. You're tired, the dishes are still in the sink, there's a notification on your phone from your bank, and somewhere between checking your balance and thinking about tomorrow's work meeting, you realize something subtle has shifted. Not loud, not flashy, just different. And the shift isn't in your lifestyle yet. You're still paying rent, you're still buying groceries, you're still thinking about gas prices and whether you should cook at home more this week. But internally, there's a quiet realization forming. Your money has started to carry more of the weight. To understand why that moment matters, we have to rewind a bit. Most people start investing with a simple, almost mechanical idea. You earn money, you save a portion, you invest it. Repeat for decades. It feels like pushing a heavy flywheel. In the beginning, every push is exhausting. You contribute from each paycheck and it barely feels like progress. You look at the account and the number moves, but not dramatically. Meanwhile, life keeps happening. Your rent goes up, groceries cost more, a car repair shows up at the worst possible time, a family member needs help, your friends are going on trips and you're quietly choosing not to. Saving in those early years can feel like swimming against the current. You're contributing consistently, but you don't feel powerful. You feel disciplined, sometimes even deprived. And there's a quiet anxiety underneath it all, a question you don't always say out loud. Will this actually be enough? That question is heavy. It shows up when you're lying in bed at night. It shows up when you see someone your age buying a house or posting about early retirement. It shows up when you imagine being older and not wanting to work, but not knowing if you'll have a choice. So you keep contributing, not because it's exciting, not because it's glamorous, but because it feels responsible. And then something interesting starts to happen. At first, your contributions are doing most of the work. If you put in $500 a month, the growth might only add a small fraction of that. Your effort is the engine, the investment growth is just a sidekick. But over time, the balance grows, and growth doesn't happen in a straight line. Some years it feels slow, some years it dips, some years it surprises you. But as the base gets bigger, even modest growth begins to represent meaningful dollars. That's when the shift begins. You look at your annual growth and realize it's not just a few $100s anymore, it's thousands. Then eventually it's more than what you contributed that year. And that's the quiet turning point, the moment when your money added more to itself than you did. It doesn't mean you stop working, it doesn't mean you stop saving, it doesn't mean you quit your job the next day and move to the beach. It simply means the dynamic has changed. For years, you were carrying the portfolio. Now, the portfolio is starting to carry you. Let me paint a picture that feels more human. Imagine someone in their 20s who started contributing early, not perfectly, not aggressively, just consistently. Maybe they were earning a modest salary. Maybe they lived with roommates longer than they wanted to. Maybe they skipped a few things their friends were spending on. Nothing dramatic. Fast forward 15 or 20 years. They're in their 40s now. Life looks different. Maybe they have a family. Maybe they've changed careers. Maybe they're earning more, but expenses are heavier. There's rent or a mortgage. There's school costs. There's aging parents. But their investment account is no longer small. When the market has a decent year, the growth might equal an entire year of their early career salary. Not because they suddenly became a financial genius, not because they discovered some secret strategy, just because time did its work. That's the part people underestimate. Compounding is not exciting day to day. It's not something you feel, it's something that reveals itself slowly, then suddenly. In the first decade, growth feels polite. In the second, it feels noticeable. In the third, it feels powerful. And the psychological shift is often more significant than the numerical one. There's something deeply calming about knowing that even if you had to reduce your contributions for a while, the machine would keep running. Imagine you get burned out at work.
The pressure is constant. Deadlines stock up. You start waking up tired before the day even begins. The thought of doing this for another 25 years feels suffocating. In the early years of investing, that feeling is terrifying because you know you need every paycheck, you need every contribution. Stopping feels dangerous. But when your investments reach a certain size, there's breathing room. You might not be able to quit, you might not want to, but you know the growth doesn't completely depend on your next deposit. That changes how you experience stress. It changes how you negotiate your salary. It changes how you think about taking a break. It changes how you respond to a toxic environment. Not in a reckless way, in a grounded way. You're no longer clinging. There's also a quieter layer to this moment. It's not just about numbers, it's about identity. For most of our adult lives, we are told that security comes from constant effort. Work hard, save more, hustle longer, keep grinding. The responsibility is always on you. And that's true to an extent. But there comes a point when your past effort begins to show up as present support. Your younger self, who skipped certain comforts and chose consistency, is now helping your current self breathe a little easier. That realization can be emotional. You might remember the version of you that was anxious about money, the version who checked their bank account before buying groceries, the version who felt embarrassed saying no to things because you were saving. And now, years later, that discipline feels less like restriction and more like quiet generosity towards yourself. The day your retirement funds start working without you isn't a day you circle on a calendar. It's more like a season. You notice that growth in a single year is larger than your annual contribution. Then you notice that even if you contributed nothing new for a while, the long-term projection wouldn't collapse. Then you notice that small market dips don't shake you the way they used to. There's less panic, more patience. But let's be honest about something. This shift doesn't eliminate all anxiety. Life still costs money. Unexpected things still happen. Inflation still exists. Careers still change. You might still worry about whether it's enough. That question doesn't disappear completely, it just softens. Instead of will I survive, it becomes how do I want to live? That's a completely different emotional space. And this is where many people misunderstand the idea of not needing to invest anymore. It's not that contributions literally don't matter, it's that they matter less than they used to. The heavy lifting is now being done by accumulated growth. Imagine someone who has built a substantial portfolio by their mid-40s. If it grows at a modest rate over the next 20 years, the growth alone could potentially carry it to a level that supports a comfortable retirement. Additional contributions help, but they're not the sole driver anymore. That knowledge can change how you design your life. Maybe you choose a lower-paying job that feels meaningful. Maybe you reduce your hours. Maybe you take a sabbatical. Maybe you start a small business you've always thought about. Not because you're careless, because you've built a cushion. And there's something deeply human about wanting that cushion. Not to escape work entirely, but to escape the feeling of being trapped. So many people don't actually hate working. They hate feeling like they have no choice. They hate feeling like one bad year could unravel everything. They hate feeling like they must tolerate every environment. They hate the quiet fear of falling behind. When your investments begin to generate significant growth on their own, that fear loosens. Let's talk about a more concrete example. Imagine someone who has accumulated around $1 million invested by their late 40s. That number didn't happen overnight. It was built over decades. In the early years, the account might grow by a few $1,000s annually. Later, by tens of thousands. Eventually, in a decent year, it might grow by 6 figures. That's a strange experience, to see your account move by an amount that once represented years of hard work. And here's the emotional part that doesn't get talked about enough. It can feel surreal. You might stare at the number and think, I remember when I was thrilled to see $5,000 in a year. Now the growth might exceed what you used to earn. It's not about bragging, it's about perspective. Time did that, consistency did that, patience did that. But even then, the moment isn't loud. You still wake up, you still brush your teeth, you still deal with traffic, you still worry about your kid's school project or your aging parent's medical appointment. The difference is internal. You're no longer building from zero, you're managing something that has momentum. Momentum is powerful. In the early years, stopping contributions feels like slamming the brakes on a fragile vehicle. Later, stopping contributions feels like taking your foot off the gas while the car continues to coast smoothly. That's the shift. And it's not reserved for ultra-high earners. It's not about extreme frugality. It's about time combined with reasonable consistency. Of course, everyone's timeline is different. Some start early, some start later, some have higher incomes, some have interruptions. Life isn't symmetrical, but the principle remains. At some point, growth becomes the dominant force. And when that happens, your relationship with money evolves. You stop obsessively checking daily fluctuations. You stop equating every market dip to a disaster. You start thinking in longer arcs. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you realize that the heavy lifting might already be done. That doesn't mean recklessness, it means perspective. There's also a subtle freedom in knowing that your future self isn't entirely dependent on your future hustle. In your 20s and 30s, your future depends almost entirely on what you continue to earn and save. That's a lot of pressure. Every career decision feels consequential. Every raise feels urgent. Every missed opportunity feels magnified. But once your investments reach a critical mass, the pressure distributes differently. Your past savings, your accumulated growth, your time in the market, they begin to share responsibility with your future efforts, and that shared responsibility feels lighter. Imagine sitting at your kitchen table late at night. The house is quiet. You open your financial dashboard, not obsessively, just casually. You glance at the projections.
You notice that even if you reduced contributions over the next few years, the long-term trajectory still looks solid. You lean back in your chair. It's not fireworks, it's relief. Relief that you're not starting from scratch anymore. Relief that your younger self made sacrifices that are now compounding. Relief that the next 20 years aren't entirely uphill. This is the moment many people misunderstand. They think the goal is to stop contributing entirely, but often people continue contributing, not because they have to, but because it feels natural. It's part of their rhythm. The difference is psychological. Before, contributions were survival. Now, they're optional reinforcement. And optional feels different than required. There's a huge emotional difference between I must save this amount or I'm doomed and I'll continue saving because it strengthens an already strong foundation. One feels tense, the other feels calm. And calm is underrated. In a world where everything feels urgent, calm is wealth. Let's also acknowledge something practical. There are seasons in life when contributions naturally decrease. Maybe you take parental leave, maybe you help a family member, maybe you decide to go back to school, maybe you pivot careers and accept a temporary pay cut. In the early accumulation years, those seasons can feel terrifying because you know growth depends heavily on your deposits. But later, those seasons feel manageable. The machine keeps running. It might slow slightly, but it doesn't stall. And that continuity is deeply reassuring. When you realize your investments can grow substantially even without aggressive new contributions, your mindset shifts from scarcity to stewardship. You're no longer desperately building, you're guiding. There's also an identity shift that happens quietly. For years, you might have seen yourself as someone trying to catch up, trying to get ahead, trying to build something. Then one day you realize you've already built something meaningful. You're not behind, you're not scrambling, you're positioned. That realization can soften a lot of internal pressure. It doesn't mean you stop caring, it doesn't mean you become passive, it means you stop operating from fear. And when fear steps back, clarity steps forward. You might start asking different questions. Instead of how much more do I need to save, you might ask what kind of life do I actually want to design? Instead of can I afford to ever slow down, you might ask when would slowing down feel right? Instead of what if I run out, you might ask what if I've already done enough heavy lifting?
These are reflective questions, not reckless ones. They're the kinds of questions that come from stability, and stability is earned slowly. There's no single number that defines this turning point for everyone. For some, it might be when their portfolio reaches a few hundred thousand and annual growth starts matching contributions. For others, it might be seven figures. It depends on expenses, timelines, lifestyle expectations, but the emotional marker is consistent. Growth overtakes effort. The compound effect becomes visible. Your money begins to generate more money than you can personally contribute in a year. And when that happens, the story changes. You're no longer solely the engine. You're the architect overseeing a system that now has its own momentum. That's powerful in a quiet way. It doesn't demand attention, it invites reflection. If you're earlier in the journey, this might feel distant. That's normal. The early years are heavy. They require discipline without visible reward. They require trust without immediate proof. But time has a strange way of rewarding consistency disproportionately. The first decade builds the base, the second multiplies it, the third transforms it. And somewhere along that curve, you cross the invisible line where contributions become supportive rather than essential. When you cross that line, work feels different. You might still show up, you might still perform, you might still care deeply about your career, but the undertone changes. You're working because you choose to, not because you're cornered. That distinction changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you respond to pressure. It changes how you think about your future. And maybe the most underrated part of all this is the emotional gratitude that can surface. Gratitude for the version of you that kept going when it felt slow. Gratitude for the discipline that didn't look glamorous. Gratitude for the years that seemed boring but were quietly building something solid. There's a deep satisfaction in realizing that your past effort created present options. Options are freedom in disguise. Not flashy freedom, not dramatic freedom, but the kind where you can breathe a little deeper when work gets stressful. The kind where you can consider helping a family member without panicking. The kind where you can imagine aging without dread. And that's really what this moment represents. It's not about stopping contributions. It's not about never working again. It's not about some cinematic declaration of independence. It's about a shift in weight. For years, you carried the future. Now the future carries some of you. And that shift is subtle, but it's real. If you're still in the early stages, pushing the flywheel, feeling like progress is slow, this might feel abstract. But every deposit, every year of consistency, every moment of patience is adding to a base that will one day begin working harder than you do. You won't wake up to fireworks. You'll wake up to quiet strength. You'll notice that even if life changes, even if income fluctuates, even if contributions pause, the structure you built continues to grow. That's when saving becomes less about survival and more about refinement. That's when investing feels less like obligation and more like stewardship. And that's when you realize that the exact moment you no longer need to invest for retirement isn't defined by a number. It's defined by momentum. Momentum that you built slowly. Momentum that now moves with or without you. Momentum that turns years of quiet discipline into decades of support. And when you feel that momentum for the first time, it doesn't make you reckless. It makes you calm. And calm in a world full of financial noise and constant urgency might be the most valuable return of all.